Thank you, Camden. Just a couple comments about Camden. A year ago, I was running a U.S. congressional campaign, and Camden was so interested in it. He went with me to 13 Lincoln Day dinners. At that time, Governor Pence was running for governor again, and he pretty much had Governor Pence's rehearsed speech down himself. But the night of the election, I was in a 6-person race. We lost by razor-thin margins, and I gave my conciliatory speech and walked out in the hallway, and Camden has his head buried in his arm, getting a little emotional, and he looked up at me and says, "Can't you run as an independent?" So he never gives up. Glad to have him with me today. He's on spring break. So thanks to the Farm Foundation and Seafair for putting on this event. It's been very insightful so far, especially the discussions around trade. Back in January, I had an interview up at Trump Tower, and during that interview, questions were asked of me, what are the 3 most important topics that agriculture should address? And I wanted to say trade, trade, and trade, but I broke it down into trade, immigration reform, making sure we have that workforce to harvest our crops and work with us as we do on our farms, but same time regulations. So I can tell you they understand that trade is important, and I believe hopefully we'll see the signs of that soon. So let's get started here. I think it's important to say that a week ago I keynoted an event in San Francisco, a tech conference. And at tech conference, my title was about a producer's perspective of how this administration might embrace ag tech and some of those solutions coming out of the Silicon Valley. It's interesting being here this week and being in the heart of the beltway of where you're asking now, how is tech going to affect U.S. agriculture? So it's quite the opposites that I didn't plan on being a part of. So a little bit, there's always a story behind why we get where we're at. Our family settled in northern Indiana in 1837 after making the trip with 9 children from the eastern seaboard, settled on a quarter section, which we still operate today, 180 years later, 7th generation later, maybe 9th sometime. But their goal when they got here was to produce enough food to feed themselves, subsistence living, maybe create a little commerce along the way. And we know that during those times that, we're off. Get this back to where it's supposed to be. Speaking of technology. So when we look at that time frame from when my family settled in 1837 where we're at today, we look at the demands on that family just trying to feed themselves to where we are today. We're part of an agricultural ecosystem globally, whether you're a smallholder farmer or a large commercial farmer in the developed nations, of feeding that 9.3 billion population we're all expecting by 2050. And I'm convinced we can get there. But let's face it, there were some dark times in our country's history of just having the ability to feed ourselves. But there was technology innovations that came along the way that helped us make sure that we could stabilize our food production in this country. One of them was when we started mechanizing agriculture back in 1900, when nearly 50% of our nation's population was involved in food production. We moved quickly to the 1930s when we had hybrid corn come along. We've seen that landmark moment, how that changed and revolutionized agriculture production. Then we had the Green Revolution. Access to some of these technologies continued to ramp up the production capacity of U.S. agriculture and agriculture around the globe in most places in developing countries. And then we get to 1994. This is when we start to apply some of these machine learning and machine technologies with GPS and some of the other telematics that we had available to us, which has grown rapidly in the last 13 years. Then we get to 96, we have biotech start. We have GMOs come to the marketplace, which is rapidly changing into many other systems. CRISPR-Cas, for instance. We're seeing some of the things going on in biologicals that are coming to the marketplace. In fact, I'm on a board of a company right now that's doing another $200 million raise in their C round to fund some of these different microbiomes. So this is a space that's rapidly changing. And then something that started about 2009 to a large degree is ag tech and big data. We started taking all this information that was coming in from the telematics we had on our farm at that time, taking this data and try to analyze it to make management decisions that would improve our outcome. For instance, we're collecting data today with soil sensors that are on planters, maybe capturing the soil's temperature, what organic matter might be. We have sensors on irrigation systems. We have variable rate technology applying water to conserve water resources. We actually farm our farm, which is about 21,000 acres, on 10 square meter basis. We know each one has its own digital signature itself. So when we look at that, we know that farming is manufacturing. A lot of people don't like to hear that word, and I can tell you, I have farming in my heart. It's my passion. It's all I've done for 42 years. But we have to take this manufacturing perspective of agriculture and understand that we have a finite amount of resources that we need to manage in a very structured manner to have a successful outcome. Now, a successful outcome may be something different each one of us in this room, but we think about it in terms of productivity on our farm, leveraging our resources, protecting the environment, lessening our carbon footprint, and making sure we can sustain our farm into future generations. Next, we look at the convergence of innovations that's occurring at this time. It started a little earlier, but it's just getting ramped up in the velocity and the volume of different sensors and technologies that we can use on the farm today to measure and monitor about any activity we want to that's coming from other places is really revolutionizing agriculture. We look at biotech. We look at all our equipment that has sensors and ability to communicate up to the cloud and bring back information into our offices to help us make better decisions. And when I look at this, we all talk about, I'm sure many of you read the book that Howard Buffett produced, and about 40 chances. And I think of my grandfather, I think of my father, they had just 40 chances in their lifetime. Now my father is 88, still runs a cow-calf herd, so he's had more than 40 chances, but typical farmer has 40 opportunities in a lifetime to find an outcome from the crop he produces. Today we can have literally 1 million a year on our farm of the different things we can leverage, whether it's in seeding algorithms, fertility, using some of these microbiomes that we're using, lessening our demand for needs for fertilizer, some of the different ways we can manage the different pesticides, putting them on, and variable rate technologies across our fields, but then collecting that yield information to find out that outcome, collecting a lot of back data on our farm to help us make better future decisions. So the more data, the more layers we can collect, the better decisions we're going to make on our farm today. So this is about a 3-year-old picture. I should update it. It was one that we put together for the New York Times when they came out and did an article on us a few years ago. But there's probably 3 or 4 times the amount of different places we're collecting information today. Whether it's reports in the fields from a crop scout that's going out and taking chlorophyll ratings, or a sprayer that as it goes across the field is collecting a chlorophyll map that's helping us understand how we need to change nitrogen rates and what we'd apply. Was it too much or was it too little? Measuring insects. We've got planes that fly over now and drones that use up to 5 different cameras to help us make decisions. We're running thermal imaging across a lot of our irrigate acres to understand when we need to irrigate and when we don't need to irrigate. Again, trying to save some of those resources that are dwindling in our. But the biggest thing here is we try to connect with other people in the system, other companies, try to help them make better decisions of how to understand us. You know, one I didn't have listed here is FSA. I'm sure there's some information. We would guard certain information, put up certain firewalls, but there's some information I believe it could be flowing into NRCS, ERS, USDA, and helping them make better decisions and have a clearer understanding of what's going on today's farms. This is just a snapshot of about 80 companies that are investing in ag, and I can tell you after this conference I was at in San Francisco last week, there was about 600 people there. About 2/3 of them were people interested in investing in ag tech. And we was talking over noon, about $7 billion have been invested so far. Relative to other markets, that's still small, but I can tell you it's encouraging to see people that have never even thought about agriculture except going to the dinner plate 3 times a day, now are interested in putting money in. They know the demand. They see what's going on. They see companies like Monsanto putting $1 billion into a company called Climate Corp a few years ago. They've all of a sudden got an interest. But what's really neat in all this is you've got a lot of people are employed in some of these ag tech companies in the Silicon Valley, intersecting with other employees that are maybe from the heart of the country. It's a hybrid model. They're producing actual tools that deliver utilities to us as farmers. So it's pretty exciting to see this, and I think it'll continue to grow. And as I said, one company I serve on the board with, they're going to try to raise another $200 or $250 million in their C round right now. So the investment capital is there, and people are interested into it. But when you look at this snapshot, this encompasses everything from companies developing ERP systems like Granular or Conservis, to companies with sensors telling us when we have an insect flying in the field and we should treat for it, to companies producing biologicals. So there's many people interested in this space, and it's a really interesting time in agriculture for all this to go on. I just wish I was Camden's age to see it go forward in the future. You know, we've had robots in our fields. You know, one person developed one out of Minnesota that would go through the field and was collecting soil samples and things like that, but there's higher and better uses for it, we feel. It could do some of our crop scouting for us, taking some of those sensories of what's going on down underneath that crop throughout the growing season. Artificial intelligence, augmented reality. One company's got an app, or has one experimental, that you can have on your phone, and when you get to the field, you hold it up, and it will show what hybrid it is, what all is taking place on that field. It can geo-reference it. So there's a lot of things coming out for tools for farmers to track things better. Blockchain technologies, I think, are interesting. 3D printing, I think that's going to be interesting. Drones, I think there's a time, some producers are getting them, that they may end up being paperweights on their desk, but the reality is I think drones will be a commercial part of the market sometime in the future. But it comes down to collecting information, making an executable decision as soon as you need to make it, and I think that's the key to about that. And the sensory market, I don't care whether you're in ag or what business it's in, sensors are growing very fast, and it's unbelievable how many there are out there today and how many will be in the future, and then the Internet of Things. So real quickly here, I'll play this little.
Okay, Billy?
Billy? Can we talk?
Yeah. Yeah. You're unhappy, Grady. Why?
Wow. May I speak candidly?
Sure, go ahead.
Major League Baseball and its fans, they're gonna be more than happy to throw you and Google Boy under the bus if you keep doing what you're doing here. You don't put a team together with a computer, Billy.
No?
No. Baseball isn't just numbers. It's not science. If it was, then anybody could do what we're doing, but they can't because they don't know what we know. They don't have our experience and they don't have our intuition.
Okay.
Billy, you got a kid in there that's got a degree in economics from Yale. You got a scout here with 29 years of baseball experience. You're listening to the wrong one. Now, there are intangibles that only baseball people understand. You're discounting what scouts have done for 150 years, even yourself.
Adapt or die.
This is about you and your shit, isn't it?
Okay, moving on. So I think what's important here is that, make sure it closes here.
System.
Okay.
Okay,
Escape.
there we go. Anyway, I think the important point to gather here is I think we in agriculture oftentimes rely on the resources we've always had in the past to make decisions. And I could think about this, I could have this conversation with someone that's guiding our agronomic decisions, someone that's guiding our financial decisions, somebody that's maybe involved in deciding what our crop mix needs to be. There are digital solutions out there for a lot of these today, and we look forward to having access to them in the future. But I think this pretty much states that people in both fields, baseball and farming, I had to throw farming in there, operate with beliefs and biases. I think that's fair. We understand we do that. To the extent you can eliminate both and replace them with data, you gain a clear advantage. So where can tech deliver today? I think one of the things that rises to the top to me real quick outside of where we've thought traditionally, and that's with crop insurance. Think about for a moment if you would have a pool of growers that would have elite processes of how they manage their farm, low loss ratios. Maybe they use elite genetics, they use a good sound agronomic system, they have certain resources under control so they can manage their output of their farm. Think about what they could do in capturing underwriters to write policies for them. And I can tell you we've met with 3 already that have an interest in this. Now, we haven't got it, so it will pick up the 60% subsidy today that we get, but we're getting closer. And we hope we can come up with some free market solutions with that. So you can look at this. There's a lot of others in here. FSA compliance, as I said, I think we could do a better job there working with FSA. Cost reductions, environmental stability, farm safety. There's a lot of places where tech can deliver, and I would say this list is just a touch of the iceberg of what we could really do with it. So really quickly, look at one thing we've done with some of the data we've done. I've heard the comment about climate change come up a number of times, and we all, as an industry, know that there's been a lot of attention focused on agriculture and our impact to the carbon, our CO2 emissions. And so we started mapping back in the late 80s, early 90s, and been working with a university and some other independent folks and coming out with this. And actually, we're going to have another one updated here hopefully within a month. But we think we're going to be inside of our goal for 2030. So there are ways with these technologies we're using today, the way we're lessening our impact on the environment, the way we're using our resources, the way we're improving productivity, we're lessening our carbon footprint. And I think this is something that's we need to talk about as an industry. So we have a chasm, though, and that chasm is farmer adoption. We have rural development connectivity. I certainly would like, if I have a wish list here, I'd like to ask USDA and Congress to take a look at rural development and how we support our rural communities, but also maybe our rural electric cooperatives. Maybe they need to be the one increasing bandwidth and offering internet throughout the countryside, because there's a deep demand for that bandwidth in the countryside. Producer investment in education and execution. I can say with the average age of the farmer, my age, some folks don't even have the internet. Some don't care to even use email. They look at this and they say, this isn't anything for me, maybe the next generation. So we have a real deep divide in ag production of who's adopting these technologies and who isn't. I think there needs to be more robust discussion between the technology companies, and I mentioned this last week, and those in Washington, D.C., of the tools that can be used at USDA and with agriculture and help us work together better. And I think it comes down to acceptance. And there's always that fear of who owns the data, who controls it, and how can I make sure the wrong person doesn't get access to it. And there are ways to do that. So I'd like to tell you that agriculture is a quick adopter of new technologies, but if you look at this chart, it took us till 1955 till we had more tractors than we had horses on the farm. So that's really not a good story to talk about. We want to think that maybe this technology adoption curve is the same thing today. I'm here to tell you I think it's a little bit better than then. When you look at this is just some of the things we do in the field and farmers' acceptance, and there's so much more, but you can see they're rapidly adapting to some of these technologies, which is a good sign. But the question is, when you get off to the right of that, what are they doing with these technologies? And I think that's the key that we have to ask ourselves before we make any investments in any of these technologies. What's the utility, and what knowledge can we gain that we can use this in the future? So that there is hope. So in wrapping up, I believe the future of successful agriculture companies will use the Internet of Things to capture new growth through 3 approaches. Boost revenues by increasing production, creating new hybrid business models, and exploiting intelligent technologies to fuel innovation and transforming the workforce. Those are the 3 areas where I see technology can deliver on the farm. I want to go back to the comment about manufacturing. I spent a lot of time studying. We live in an area that they produce about 70% of the world's knees and hips. I spent a lot of time watching how the manufacturing process works in a place like that, how they look at things. Now, the only difference is in the manufacturing we do, we don't have 4 walls or a ceiling over, so we have to deal with Mother Nature. But there's ways to deal with Mother Nature to understand how to react to the consequences. So it's always a pleasure to look at other business and how they operate. With that, I'll conclude. I'll look forward to questions a little bit later on. And oh, okay, okay. That's a lot to say in 15 minutes, so.
I know,
didn't get
that's
into
why
the
I know
details
there's
I'd
some
like to,
questions
but-
out here. Do we have a couple of questions for Mr. Tom? Yes, sir. Karen's bringing over the microphone.
Yeah, Howard Marks, I used to work at USDA. So much thank you for your presentation, and
Thank you.
thanks much for your service in running for Congress. Sorry you didn't win.
Yeah.
My question is, you know, you mentioned productivity, and it's been amazing. I saw the slide with Green Revolution. I used to be the Associate Administrator of the Office of International Cooperation and Development, USDA, and it's awesome what's Norman Borlaug had done and all these wonderful advances. What disturbs me, though, recently is this sort of like hysteria against advancement in agriculture, like the GMO thing. The day doesn't pass when I go into a grocery store here in Washington and I see on the labels, no GMO, and the labels are getting bigger and bigger, you know, and suddenly advancement in agriculture, like genetically modified organisms, has been demonized. And, you know, I really worry about whether we'll be able to feed the growing world's population if this hysteria grows, maybe beyond the borders of the U.S. So I was wondering, you know, what do you feel? I mean, this is a wonderful presentation this morning, but how do we handle this? Thank you.
I think if I could answer how to handle this, I'd probably have a lot of people paying a lot of money to figure out how to handle this. So there's been a lot of money spent, let's face it, trying to educate consumers and even our own industry of the benefits and understanding what's reality and what's scientific and what are the facts. And I think there's obviously, as we all know, you don't have to do many Google searches to enter GMO, and the first 200 hits will be negative comments about it, obviously. But I think we as an industry need to reach outside of our borders. We do a very good job of talking to ourselves, and we need to reach out to media concerns and others that reach out to the consumer and help them understand. I'm embarrassed as one person, as a farmer, that I, myself, haven't got out in front of the audience more, and other farmers. I think we've got a great message to tell, and I think we need to get in the urban audiences and not be afraid of standing up to resistance, but at the same time, listening to their comments. I think we have to listen first and then comment, but I think we need to get outside of our own internal circles and have that dialogue. Good point, though. We got a lot of work to do.
Other question? Yes, right back here.
Thank you. Hubert Hamer with USDA NASS. We're the data collection arm for the department, collect a lot of information by surveys from producers. We're very interested in this big data phenomenon and would like to figure out how we can get access to information. Can you talk about whether you see producers being receptive to the idea of sharing that information? You mentioned USDA, but do you feel like that producers will be receptive to that idea?
Every producer's got a different perspective on this, and not only perspective, but understanding. And I think there's certain information that we feel that anonymized should be shared, can be shared. And I think there's things we can do with that would help NASS, ERS, and help us make some better decisions going forward. There's certain proprietary data, like any manufacturing company, that we want to make sure we hold close. If we come up with some new method to produce a crop, our own recipe, we want to make sure that's not getting leaked out because we've put a lot of money in the development of that trade secret, if you want to call it that. But there is other places we want to shoot. But we got to have producers' willingness and understanding of what is going to who and how are they using it, and will they use it against us. And I think there's a lot of concerns, and there needs to be a lot of continued discussions. I know some different organizations have brought this up, and I'm glad they have. They've been a big proponent of the discussion, but I think very little has occurred in really understanding what should be shared, and so it's going to take a lot of ongoing conversations. But I do think we could have a more robust agriculture if we could communicate a little bit more.
And I will say data shared with NASS is protected by law.
I'm sorry, Hubert, we didn't hear that.
No, I was just going to mention that data shared with NASS is protected by law.
Absolutely.
All right, we have, there's one question right back here, Karen, right behind you. We're going to take that one, and then I'm going to introduce our next discussant. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm a veterinary student who's externing with the American Veterinary Medical Association. My question is regarding more of the farm technology. So throughout vet school, I've noticed that the farms that we've visited adopt a lot more technology, and those big farms that are able to do that, they're a lot more efficient. things look great on the farm, but we also visit a lot of farms where they're smaller, and frankly, there isn't the money to adopt a lot of this technology. So how do you anticipate getting smaller farms to be able to adopt some more of these things, such as, like, I mean, I guess a lot of our dairy farms all have dairy comp now, but while we can do better for collecting data and the quality of life, at the end of the day, smaller farms really can't adopt a lot of these things. So how do you get them to?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and that's a very good question. You know, let's face it, the technologies are out there for everybody to access. Some are, you know, they have a high price tag to get into. Some are on a per acre basis or per unit of production if it's a dairy cow operation or something. My belief is it's not so much the cost of the technology, it's the education that needs to occur to get that person to understand how to fully utilize it and what value it delivers back. I can tell you, being involved in some market development, a number of these tech companies, people can afford it, but they don't understand it and they don't know what the value is coming back to them, so they hesitate and they come up with excuses not to do it. But you know, I've been in Kenya and Tanzania and where they're still using flip phones, but I've seen some smallholder farmers all of a sudden had a technology that they could trade their crops that they're producing and actually extracting higher value from the market because they had more market discovery, more awareness, and so there's simple tools like that can come along too, but it's almost like buying a computer. You know, everybody can have one today. The cost of technology keeps going down. A lot of that's happening here in the technology and agriculture sector as well. But we need to think of everybody, small and large.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.